I stood in my kitchen that Sunday afternoon in late October, watching the risotto simmer on the stove. The smell of wild mushrooms and parmesan filled the air, and I couldn't help but smile. It was Sienna's favorite dish, the one I used to make for her every Sunday when she was little, before everything changed between us. Before my daughter Margaret built that wall between me and my granddaughter, before Sienna stopped visiting, before those warm Sunday afternoons became a distant memory, I'd set the table with my good china, the Wedgwood set that Richard and I had bought in London 30 years ago. The cream-colored plates with delicate gold trim caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. I'd prepared everything perfectly. Fresh bread from the bakery on Greenwich Avenue, a simple arugula salad, and the risotto. Nothing fancy, nothing that would make her feel uncomfortable. Just good food, made with love. When the doorbell rang at 2 o'clock, my heart jumped. I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried to the front door. Through the glass panel, I could see Sienna standing there with 2 young women I didn't recognize. They were dressed in expensive-looking clothes, designer handbags hanging from their shoulders, perfectly styled hair. Sienna wore a cream-colored sweater that looked like cashmere and jeans that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. I opened the door with my warmest smile. "Sienna, sweetheart, come in, come in." My granddaughter's face was tight, her smile forced. "Hi, Grandma. These are my friends, Brittany and Chelsea. I hope it's okay that I brought them." "Of course, darling. There's plenty of food." I stepped aside to let them in, noticing how Sienna avoided making direct eye contact with me. The 3 women walked into my home, and I heard one of them whisper something I couldn't quite catch. They all laughed, a sound that made my stomach clench for reasons I couldn't explain. I led them into the kitchen, gesturing toward the table. "Please, sit down. I just need to finish the risotto." But they remained standing, huddled together near the island counter. I could feel their eyes on me as I stirred the pot, adding the last bit of butter to make it creamy. 3 weeks ago, Margaret had called me, her voice tight with worry. "Mom, Sienna and Jared are going through a rough patch. Jared's company did some layoffs. He's been temporarily reduced to part-time. They're struggling." I'd wanted to help immediately, but Margaret had cut me off. "Don't, Mom. Don't just throw money at it. Sienna needs to learn to handle things herself." But I couldn't just do nothing. This was my granddaughter, my only grandchild. So I'd invited her to lunch, planning to talk to her, to offer whatever support she needed. Not money, necessarily. Just presence. Love. The kind of support that doesn't come with strings attached. I served the risotto into bowls, each portion generous and steaming. I placed the first bowl in front of Sienna with a gentle smile. "I know things have been difficult lately, sweetheart. I made your favorite." The transformation in Sienna's face was instant and terrifying. Her eyes went from politely distant to something dark and furious. She stared at the bowl, then at me, then turned to look at her friends. I saw one of them, the blonde named Brittany, raise her eyebrows with an expression I can only describe as contemptuous amusement. "What did you just say?" Sienna's voice was low and dangerous. I felt my smile falter. I just meant that Margaret mentioned things have been tight with Jared's job situation, and I wanted to—" "You wanted to what?" Sienna stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against my hardwood floor. "Swoop in and play the rich grandmother? Make yourself feel important by rescuing poor, pathetic Sienna?" My heart started pounding. "Sweetheart, no, that's not what I—" "My mother told you about our private business?" Her voice was rising now, her face flushing red. "And you thought what? That you'd invite me over and feed me like I'm some charity case?" The 2 friends exchanged glances, and I saw them trying to hide smiles. This was entertainment to them. My humiliation was their Sunday afternoon amusement. "Sienna, please, I just wanted to help. You're my granddaughter, I love you, and if you're going through—" She picked up the bowl. For a moment I thought she was going to eat, that this terrible misunderstanding would resolve itself. But then I saw her hands trembling with rage, and I knew what was about to happen before it did. Sienna hurled the bowl at the floor. The crash was deafening in my kitchen. The Wedgwood china shattered into dozens of pieces, risotto splattered across my floor, across the cabinets, across my legs. The sound seemed to echo forever. "Keep your charity to yourself," she screamed, her face inches from mine. "I'm not a beggar. I don't need your rich lady handouts." I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. I felt like I'd been slapped, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Sienna turned to her friends, who were both staring with wide eyes now, clearly shocked by the violence of what had just happened. "You see what I have to deal with? She thinks because she has money, she can just treat me like I'm nothing, like I'm some homeless person she picked up off the street." "Sienna, I never—" My voice came out as a whisper. "Save it." She grabbed her purse from the counter. "Come on, girls. Let's get out of here. The air in here smells like pity and old money." The blonde friend, Brittany, at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Sienna, maybe you should— Let's go!" Sienna stormed toward the front door, and her friends followed quickly behind her. I heard the front door slam so hard that the windows rattled. Then silence. Complete, devastating silence. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by broken china and ruined food, and I couldn't move. My legs felt weak. My hands were shaking. I looked down and saw risotto on my shoes, on my pants, splattered across the floor I'd mopped just this morning. 26 years. I'd known this child for 26 years. I'd held her in the hospital the day she was born, this tiny, perfect creature who looked up at me with those big brown eyes. I'd rocked her to sleep when Margaret was too tired. I'd taught her to bake cookies when she was 5, letting her stand on a stool in this very kitchen, flour on her nose, giggling as we stirred the batter. Where had that little girl gone? When had she become this person who could look at her grandmother with such contempt, such hatred? I bent down slowly and started picking up the pieces of broken china. My hands were still trembling. Each shard I collected felt like a piece of my heart. This wasn't just about a broken bowl. This was about respect, about love, about family. This was about a granddaughter who had just publicly humiliated the woman who had loved her unconditionally since the moment she was born. I thought about calling Margaret, but what would I say? "Your daughter just threw food in my face? She screamed at me in my own home?" Margaret would probably find a way to make it my fault anyway. She'd been doing that for years, ever since she'd decided that my success in business meant I'd failed as a mother. Instead, I sat down at my kitchen table, surrounded by the mess, and I cried. Not the gentle tears of a sad moment, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone who just realized that love alone isn't enough, that you can give and give and give, and sometimes all you get back is cruelty. My phone buzzed. A text from Helena, my best friend and business partner. "How did lunch go with Sienna?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I'll tell you tomorrow. Not ready to talk about it yet." Helena knew me well enough not to push. She simply replied, "I'm here when you're ready. Love you." I set the phone down and looked around my beautiful kitchen. This house in Greenwich, with its high ceilings and marble counters and views of the gardens I'd cultivated over 20 years. I'd worked so hard for all of this, started with nothing, absolutely nothing, and built an empire through sheer determination and countless 18-hour days. And for what? So my granddaughter could throw my love back in my face? So my daughter could maintain her emotional distance while silently judging every choice I made? So I could sit alone in this big house, surrounded by expensive things, with no one to share them with? Richard would have known what to do. He always knew how to handle family conflicts, how to smooth over the rough edges. But Richard had been gone for 6 years now, and I'd been navigating these waters alone, making mistakes, trying my best, and apparently failing miserably. I finally got up and cleaned the floor, scrubbing the risotto out of the grout lines between the tiles. The physical work helped calm my mind. With each wipe of the cloth, I tried to process what had happened. Sienna was 26 years old. She was married to Jared, a man I'd never particularly liked, but had welcomed into the family because that's what you do. Margaret had told me they were struggling financially, that Jared's job situation was uncertain, and I'd responded the way I always responded to family in need. I'd offered comfort, support, a warm meal. But Sienna had seen it as an insult, or maybe she'd seen it as an opportunity to perform for her friends, to show them how independent she was, how she didn't need anyone, especially not her wealthy grandmother. The thought made me feel sick. Had she brought those girls here specifically to have an audience for her rejection of me? Had this entire thing been planned? I threw the dirty towels in the washing machine and stood in my laundry room, staring at nothing. The afternoon sun was starting to fade, casting long shadows across the floor. In a few hours, it would be dark. Another Sunday ending, another week beginning. Life would go on, the way it always did. But something had shifted inside me. Something had broken, and I wasn't sure it could be repaired. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to be there for my family. Working hard, yes. Building my business, absolutely. But always with the intention of creating security for the people I loved. I'd put Margaret through private school and an excellent college. I'd been there when she got married, when she had Sienna, through every milestone. I'd tried to be present for Sienna, too, despite Margaret's efforts to limit my involvement. And this was the result. A granddaughter who thought so little of me that she could destroy my property, humiliate me, and walk away without a backward glance. I went upstairs to my bedroom and changed out of my stained clothes. In the mirror, I saw a 58-year-old woman with perfectly styled silver hair, good bone structure, expensive skin care that kept my face relatively smooth. I saw someone who looked successful, put together, in control. But inside, I felt shattered. That night, I lay in bed unable to sleep, replaying the scene over and over. Sienna's face, twisted with contempt, the sound of the bowl hitting the floor, the laughter from her friends, the way she'd called my love charity. I thought about all the times I'd offered to help her, to teach her about business, to share what I'd learned. Margaret had always shut me down. She needs to find her own way, Mom. Not everyone wants to be you. But I'd never wanted Sienna to be me. I just wanted her to know that she had support, that she had someone in her corner. Was that so wrong? Around 3 a.m, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been avoiding all evening. This wasn't going to get better on its own. This wasn't a misunderstanding that would blow over. This was a fundamental problem in my relationship with both my daughter and my granddaughter, and I had no idea how to fix it. But I did know one thing. I would not let myself be treated this way again. I would not be humiliated in my own home, would not have my love thrown back at me like garbage. If Sienna wanted distance, she would get it. If she wanted to pretend I didn't exist, to treat my kindness as an insult, then fine. I was done reaching out only to have my hand slapped away. I'd spent decades being strong, being resilient, building something from nothing. I'd survived Richard's death, survived the lonely years that followed. I could survive this too. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind. How had it come to this? How had love turned into something so twisted and painful? And was there any way back from here? I didn't know. And in that moment, exhausted and heartbroken, I wasn't sure I cared anymore. I woke up the next morning feeling hollowed out, like someone had scraped away everything inside me and left just the shell. The events of yesterday played on loop in my mind as I made coffee, each replay making me feel worse. But as I sat at my kitchen table, now spotlessly clean, no evidence of yesterday's disaster, I found myself thinking back to how it all began. How I'd gotten here, to this place where my own granddaughter could hate me so much. I was 24 when I married Richard Clark. He was 26, a newly licensed architect with big dreams and a portfolio full of beautiful drawings that no one wanted to pay him to build yet. We were young and stupid and in love, living in a cramped apartment in Stamford with furniture we'd bought at yard sales. I worked at Bloomingdale's in the handbag department, standing on my feet 8 hours a day, smiling at wealthy women who spent more on a single purse than I made in a month. Richard would work late into the night at the small architecture firm that had hired him, sketching and drafting, hoping for his big break. I'd come home exhausted, cook dinner on our tiny stove, and we'd eat together talking about the future. The house we'd own someday, the children we'd have, the life we'd build. I got pregnant with Margaret when I was 26. Richard had just gotten his first major project, a renovation of a historic building in downtown Greenwich. The money was good, but not great. We were still struggling, still living paycheck to paycheck. When Margaret was born, I took 6 weeks off work, then went back to Bloomingdale's because we needed my income. My mother watched Margaret during the day. She'd bring her to me during my lunch break so I could nurse her in the employee break room, this tiny, windowless space that smelled like old coffee and someone's leftover lunch. I'd hold my baby girl, breathing in that perfect newborn smell, and promise her that someday things would be better. Someday I'd be able to give her everything she deserved. Richard's career started taking off when Margaret was 3. He designed a house for a prominent family in Greenwich, and suddenly everyone wanted Richard Clark to design their home. The money started coming in, real money, and we bought our first house. Nothing like the mansion I live in now, but it was ours, and it had a yard where Margaret could play. But with Richard's success came longer hours. He'd leave before Margaret woke up and come home after she was asleep. Weekends were filled with client meetings and site visits. And me? I was still working at Bloomingdale's, but I'd been promoted to assistant manager. I was working 50 hours a week, managing a team, dealing with inventory and difficult customers and employee drama. Margaret grew up with nannies, good nannies, women I carefully selected and paid well, but still, nannies. I missed her first steps because I was at work. I missed her preschool graduation because we had a major inventory audit that day. I missed so many moments, always telling myself it was temporary, that I was building something, that the sacrifice would be worth it. When Margaret was 10, something happened that changed everything. I was 36 years old, and I'd been managing the handbag department at Bloomingdale's for 3 years. I knew everything about luxury handbags, about what sold and what didn't, about what women really wanted versus what designers thought they wanted. One day, a sales representative from a new Italian designer came in, trying to get us to carry her line. The bags were beautiful, unique, nothing like what anyone else was selling. I wanted to place an order. My district manager said no. Too risky, too unknown, our customers wouldn't understand the aesthetic. I knew he was wrong. I'd been selling handbags for 12 years. I knew our customers better than he did. That night, I told Richard about it. About this beautiful line we were turning down, about how frustrated I was that no one would listen to me. He said something that changed my life. Then stop waiting for someone else to listen. Open your own store. I laughed. It seemed impossible. But the idea took root, and I couldn't shake it. I started doing research, making plans, calculating costs. I had some money saved, about $30,000 I'd been squirreling away from my salary over the years. Richard's firm was doing well. We had equity in our house. It was possible, barely possible, but possible. I opened my first boutique when I was 38 years old, a tiny space in downtown Greenwich, barely 800 square feet. I called it Clark's, and I filled it with carefully curated pieces from designers I believed in. I worked 7 days a week, open to close. Margaret was 13, and I missed even more of her life. School plays, volleyball games, mother-daughter events. There was always a reason I couldn't be there. Always something at the store that needed my attention. Richard tried to tell me I was working too hard, that I was missing Margaret's childhood. I told him I was building Margaret's future, that someday she'd understand, Someday she'd be proud of what I'd accomplished. The store was successful. Within 2 years, I'd opened a second location. Within 5 years, I had 3 boutiques, and I'd brought on Helena Moretti as my business partner. Helena was 10 years younger than me, brilliant with numbers, and had impeccable taste. Together, we built something real, something substantial. But Margaret grew distant. When she was 16, she told me she hated coming to the stores. "All you care about is work," she said. "You're never home. You missed my entire childhood for handbags, Mom, expensive handbags." I tried to explain, tried to tell her that I'd done it for her, to give her opportunities I never had. She went to the best private school in Connecticut. She had everything she wanted. She'd never had to worry about money, never had to work a minimum wage job, never had to struggle the way Richard and I had. "I would have traded all of it for a mom who actually showed up," she said. Those words haunted me. Still haunt me. Because part of me knew she was right. I'd been so focused on building financial security that I'd missed the emotional security she needed. But I couldn't go back and change it. All I could do was move forward and hope that someday she'd understand. Margaret went to Cornell for college, majored in marketing, graduated with honors. She got a job at a pharmaceutical company right out of school, moved up quickly. She was brilliant, driven, successful. She met Derek during her second year at the company. He was a consultant doing work for them. He was steady, conservative, careful with money. The opposite of Richard in many ways. They got married when Margaret was 28, and I paid for the entire wedding. $50,000 for a day that should have been joyful, but felt somehow hollow. When Margaret got pregnant with Sienna, I promised myself things would be different. I'd be the grandmother I hadn't been able to be as a mother. I'd be present, available, involved. I'd make up for all the moments I'd missed with Margaret. But Margaret had other ideas. From the moment Sienna was born, Margaret controlled access to her. "I don't want her growing up thinking that work is more important than family, Mom," she told me. "I don't want her to have the childhood I had." The barb hurt, but I accepted it. I'd earned that criticism. So I tried to be there when Margaret allowed it. Sunday dinners, occasional weekends, holidays. I bought Sienna gifts, expensive gifts, trying to show my love the only way I knew how. "Stop trying to buy her affection," Margaret would say. "She doesn't need more toys, she needs presents." But Margaret didn't want my presence. Not really. Every time I offered to babysit, she had an excuse. Every time I suggested taking Sienna for a weekend, Margaret had other plans. I was kept at arm's length, allowed small doses of grandmotherhood, but never anything substantial. Sienna was a beautiful child, smart, funny, curious. She looked like Margaret but had my eyes, that same gray-green that Richard used to say looked like the ocean in winter. When she was little, she'd run to me with her arms outstretched, calling Grandma, with pure joy in her voice. But as she got older, as Margaret's influence grew stronger, things changed. By the time Sienna was a teenager, she was polite but distant. She'd thank me for gifts with a stiff hug and a practiced smile. She rarely called, rarely visited unless Margaret brought her. Richard died when Sienna was 20. A massive heart attack at 64, gone before the ambulance even arrived. I was devastated, lost, drowning in grief. Margaret came to the funeral, of course, brought Derek and Sienna, but she left immediately after, citing work obligations. "I've got a major product launch next week, Mom. I can't stay." Sienna had hugged me at the funeral, whispered, "I'm sorry, Grandma," and then disappeared into her phone, texting throughout the entire service. I sold one of the boutiques after Richard died. I didn't need 3 anymore, didn't need to work 70 hours a week. Helena took on more responsibility, and I finally slowed down. But by then, the damage was done. Margaret had built her walls, Sienna had learned to keep me at a distance, and I was alone in this big house with nothing but my money and my regrets. When Sienna got married 2 years ago, I wasn't involved in the planning. I received an invitation 8 weeks before the wedding, formal and impersonal. I attended, wore an expensive dress, Gave them a check for $25,000 as a wedding gift. Sienna had smiled and thanked me, and I saw nothing in her eyes. No warmth, no connection, no recognition that I was her grandmother who'd loved her since the day she was born. That was when I started to realize that maybe it was too late. Maybe Margaret had been successful in her mission to keep Sienna away from me. Maybe my granddaughter saw me the way Margaret did, as a woman who'd chosen work over family, money over love, success over connection. 3 weeks ago, when Margaret called to tell me about Sienna's financial troubles, I saw it as an opportunity, a chance to be there for her, to show her that I cared about more than money, that I could offer comfort and support without strings attached. Yesterday proved how wrong I'd been. Yesterday proved that Sienna didn't see me as someone who could offer comfort. She saw me as a rich old woman trying to buy relevance in her life. She saw my love as charity, my concern as pity. And maybe, in some twisted way, Margaret had won. She'd successfully poisoned Sienna against me, turned her into someone who could throw food at my feet and feel justified in doing so. I finished my coffee and stared out the window at my gardens. Richard and I had planted those gardens together. 30 years of careful cultivation. Beautiful now, mature and established. Unlike my relationships with my daughter and granddaughter, which had never had a chance to grow properly. Helena called at 9. "Okay, you said you'd tell me today. What happened with Sienna?" I told her everything. The whole awful story, including the part where I'd sat on my kitchen floor crying like a child. Helena listened without interrupting, the way only a true friend can. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Helena said, "Vivian, you deserve better than that. That girl needs to learn that there are consequences for cruelty." "She's my granddaughter," I said weakly. "That doesn't give her the right to abuse you," Helena said firmly. "You need to set boundaries, real boundaries, not just hurt feelings you'll get over in a week." I knew Helena was right, but setting boundaries with family felt impossible. How do you draw a line with someone you've loved their entire life? How do you say no to your only grandchild? I didn't have answers yet. All I knew was that something had to change. I couldn't keep offering love only to have it thrown back at me. I couldn't keep trying to be part of their lives when they'd made it clear I wasn't wanted. For the first time in my life, I had to consider the possibility that some relationships couldn't be fixed, that some damage was too deep, some walls too high. And that thought broke my heart all over again. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange, heavy silence. I didn't call Margaret. She didn't call me. It was as if that Sunday afternoon had created a rupture so complete that neither of us knew how to bridge it. Or maybe we were both waiting for the other person to make the first move, to acknowledge what had happened, to say something that would make sense of the senselessness. Helena came over that first Wednesday evening with a bottle of wine and Thai takeout. We sat in my living room, and she let me talk through everything again, all my doubts and questions and pain. "You know what bothers me most?" I said, picking at my pad thai without really eating it. "I keep replaying it, trying to figure out what I did wrong, what I said that triggered such an extreme reaction. Vivian, you offered her food that you made with love. There is no universe in which that deserves the response you got." Helena poured us both more wine. "Stop trying to make this your fault." But maybe Margaret's right. Maybe I do try to fix things with money, with grand gestures. No. Helena's voice was sharp. "You made risotto. You didn't hand her a check. You didn't offer to pay her rent. You made her favorite meal because you're her grandmother, and you love her. That's not throwing money at a problem. That's being family." I wanted to believe her, but doubt had taken root deep inside me, the kind that grows in the dark places where old wounds live. By the end of that first week, I'd started to hear things through the grapevine. Greenwich is a small town in the ways that matter, where wealthy people know other wealthy people, where gossip travels through country clubs and charity events and casual lunch meetings. Karen Mitchell, who sat on the board of the Children's Hospital with me, mentioned seeing Sienna at a restaurant in Stamford. "She looked wonderful, dear. Designer everything. You must be so proud." I smiled and said nothing. But inside, I was calculating. If Sienna and Jared were truly struggling financially, why was she still maintaining such an expensive appearance? Why the designer bags, the expensive restaurants? Helena has more direct connections to the digital world than I do. Her daughter works in social media marketing. That second week, Helena showed me Sienna's Instagram account on her phone. I'd never been much for social media, preferred to keep my private life private. But there it was, Sienna's carefully curated life on display for thousands of followers. Photo after photo of a life that looked perfect. Sienna and Jared at trendy restaurants, plates of food that cost $50 each. Sienna in different designer outfits, perfectly styled, professionally lit. Sienna at a spa, at a beach, at a rooftop bar in Manhattan. The captions were all inspirational quotes about success and independence and building your empire. "This was posted 3 days ago," Helena said, pointing to a photo of Sienna holding a designer handbag I recognized. Valentino, probably $1,500. Does this look like someone who's struggling? It didn't. It looked like someone living a life of luxury. But I knew something about appearances, about the difference between what you show the world and what's actually true. I'd spent decades building a business based partly on understanding that gap, on knowing that women will spend their last dollar on a handbag that makes them look successful even when they're drowning in debt. "It's all smoke and mirrors," I said quietly. "She's living on credit, building a house of cards." Helena looked at me with something like pity. "And when it falls, Vivian, she's going to expect you to catch her." I thought about that conversation constantly over the following days. Was Helena right? Was this all leading somewhere, to some inevitable moment when Sienna would need real help and expect me to provide it? And if that moment came, what would I do? 10 days after the incident, Margaret finally called. It was a Tuesday evening, just after 7. I was reading in my study when my phone rang, and I saw her name on the screen. My heart rate spiked. I let it ring 3 times before answering, trying to calm myself. "Hello, Margaret." "Mom." Her voice was tight, controlled. "We need to talk about what happened with Sienna." I waited, saying nothing. Let her fill the silence. She told me what happened, about the lunch. Margaret paused, and I could hear her take a breath. "Mom, you put her in a terrible position." The words hit me like a slap. "I put her in a position? Margaret, she destroyed my property and screamed at me in my own home." "Because you embarrassed her in front of her friends." Margaret's voice rose. "You brought up her private financial situation, implied she needed charity, treated her like a child who needed to be taken care of." "I made her lunch." I was standing now, pacing my study. "I made her favorite meal because you told me she was struggling and I wanted to do something kind. How is that embarrassing her?" "You don't get it, do you?" Margaret's voice had that edge it always got when she was building up to something cruel. "You've never gotten it. Everything with you is about what you can provide, what you can give, how you can solve problems with your money and your resources. You don't know how to just be present without making it about what you have and what she doesn't." I felt something crack inside me. "That is not fair, Margaret. I was trying to help." "You were trying to feel needed. There's a difference." She sighed, a long suffering sound that made me want to scream. "Look, Sienna overreacted. I'll grant you that. The way she handled it was immature. But you need to understand that she's under a lot of pressure right now, and the last thing she needs is her wealthy grandmother swooping in to remind her of her failures." "Her failures? She's 26 years old, Margaret. She's barely started her career. There are no failures here, just normal young adult struggles." I wasn't judging her. I was trying to support her. By throwing her situation in her face? By making her risotto. My voice broke, and I hated myself for it. By inviting her into my home and trying to give her a nice afternoon. That's all it was, just food and time together. There was a long pause. Then Margaret said in a quieter voice, "Maybe that's how you saw it. But that's not how she experienced it." And there it was, the fundamental disconnect between us. I could have the purest intentions in the world, and Margaret would find a way to interpret them as something sinister. "What do you want from me, Margaret?" I asked, suddenly exhausted. "Do you want an apology?" "Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I tried to be a grandmother to my granddaughter. I'm sorry I worked hard to build a life that could provide security for my family. I'm sorry I wasn't perfect. I'm sorry for every mistake I've made since you were born." "Is that enough?" "Mom, don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic, I'm being honest. You've held my choices against me for 30 years. You've made sure Sienna knows that I'm someone to be kept at a distance. And now I'm being blamed for trying to break through that distance you created. So tell me, what exactly am I supposed to do?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was cold. "I think you need to give Sienna some space. A lot of space. Let her reach out to you if and when she's ready." "And if she's never ready?" "Then you'll have your answer about whether this relationship can be salvaged." She hung up, just ended the call without saying goodbye, leaving me standing in my study with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to silence. I sat down heavily in Richard's old leather chair, the one I'd kept in the study because it still smelled faintly like his cologne. I thought about calling Margaret back, trying to explain better, trying to make her understand. But what was the point? We'd been having variations of this same conversation for decades, and nothing ever changed. Helena was right. I needed to set boundaries. Real ones. Not just hurt feelings that would fade, but actual lines that I wouldn't let anyone cross again. The question was whether I had the strength to enforce them. The third week brought an unexpected revelation. I was having lunch with Catherine Bradshaw, an old friend who ran a boutique consulting firm. We'd known each other for 20 years, served on several nonprofit boards together. Over salads at our usual spot, she mentioned that her firm had done some work for Jared's company last year. "Oh, I didn't realize you knew Jared," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Catherine's expression shifted, became guarded. "Well, I don't know him personally, but we worked on a project that his division was involved in." She paused, then leaned forward. "Vivian, I probably shouldn't say anything, but there's been talk in professional circles about what happened with him at the firm." My pulse quickened. "What kind of talk?" She glanced around, making sure no one nearby could hear us. "He wasn't laid off or reduced to part-time. He was fired, terminated for cause. There was an incident with a client, some miscommunication about investment projections that cost them a significant amount of money. The firm wanted to avoid a lawsuit, so they let him go quietly, but word gets around in our industry." I set down my fork, no longer hungry. "When did this happen?" "Almost 2 months ago." Catherine looked at me with concern. "You really didn't know?" I shook my head. "Margaret told me he'd been reduced to part-time, that they were struggling but managing." "Vivienne?" Catherine reached across the table and touched my hand. "I don't know their financial situation, but if he's been unemployed for 2 months, and if he hasn't told his wife the truth about what happened, that's not a recipe for stability." After lunch, I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time, processing this information. Jared had been lying. To Sienna, to Margaret, probably to everyone. He'd been unemployed for 2 months, which meant whatever money problems they had were much worse than anyone knew. And Sienna, maintaining her expensive lifestyle on Instagram, was probably drowning in debt she didn't even fully understand yet. I thought about calling Margaret, telling her what I'd learned, but I already knew how that would go. She'd accuse me of gossiping, of interfering, of trying to control Sienna's life. So I kept the information to myself, tucked it away like a card I might need to play later. That evening, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I created an Instagram account. Helena had to walk me through it over the phone, and I looked at Sienna's profile. Really looked at it, scrolling back through months of posts. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Every photo was carefully staged, perfectly lit, professionally composed. Sienna presented herself as a successful social media manager, a woman who had it all figured out. But the cracks were there if you looked closely. The same outfits appearing in multiple photos, just styled differently. Restaurants that looked expensive but were actually mid-range places with good lighting. The designer bags, yes, but the same 3 bags rotated through dozens of photos. And the captions. God, the captions. Never depend on anyone but yourself. Build your own empire. Success is the best revenge. Revenge against what? Against whom? Against me, I realized, with a sick feeling. Against the grandmother who represented everything she thought she should reject. Independence, self-sufficiency, the illusion of needing no one. These were the values she was performing for her followers, probably the same values Margaret had drilled into her since childhood. I closed the app and set my phone down, feeling like I'd invaded Sienna's privacy, even though everything I'd looked at was public. But I'd learned something important. Sienna wasn't just struggling financially. She was struggling with her identity, with her sense of self, with the gap between who she wanted to be and who she actually was. And that scared me, because I knew from experience that people facing that kind of crisis make desperate choices. They double down on the facade, go deeper into debt, make reckless decisions to maintain the illusion. I'd seen it in business countless times. People who couldn't admit failure, who kept spending money they didn't have, who crashed spectacularly because they couldn't face the truth. Helena came by the next evening with Chinese food and a bottle of whiskey. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, setting the bags on my kitchen counter. "When's the last time you slept properly?" "I don't know. Thursday, maybe?" I got out plates and glasses. "Helena, I found out something about Jared, about why he lost his job." I told her what Catherine had shared, about the termination, the timeline, the lies. Helena listened, her expression growing darker. "So Sienna doesn't even know the full extent of how bad things are," she said when I finished. "She thinks he's part-time. She probably thinks they can manage until he finds something full-time again. But the reality is that he was fired. He's been unemployed for 2 months, and he's probably not going to get another job in that industry easily if he was terminated for cause." "Exactly." I poured us both whiskey. "They're headed for disaster, and she has no idea. And you're sitting here knowing this, waiting for the other shoe to drop." I nodded. Margaret told me to give Sienna space, to wait for her to reach out to me. But knowing what I know now, "What are you going to do when she does reach out?" Helena asked quietly. "Because she will, Vivian. When things get bad enough, when she's desperate enough, she'll come to you. And you need to decide right now what your response will be." I thought about that question long after Helena left. What would I do? Would I open my wallet and solve all her problems, the way Margaret accused me of always doing? Would I turn her away, enforce those boundaries I'd promised myself I'd set? Would I try to find some middle ground, some way to help without enabling? I didn't have an answer yet. All I knew was that something was coming. I could feel it, the way you can feel a storm building on the horizon. The air gets heavy, charged with electricity, and you know that soon everything will break open. I just didn't know how bad the storm would be, or whether any of us would survive it intact. 3 weeks and 4 days after Sienna threw that bowl at my feet, my intercom buzzed at 10:45 p.m. It was November now, one of those cold, rainy nights where the temperature drops just enough to make you question whether it might snow. I was already in my nightgown and robe, reading in bed, when the sound cut through the quiet house. I went downstairs and pressed the button on the intercom panel. "Yes?" The voice that came through was barely recognizable, choked with tears, desperate, broken. "Grandma, please, It's Sienna. I need to talk to you. Please. My hand hovered over the button that would open the gate. Every instinct in me wanted to press it immediately, to let her in, to wrap her in my arms and tell her everything would be okay. That's what grandmothers do. That's what love looks like. But another part of me, the part that had been humiliated, hurt, dismissed, hesitated. This was the moment Helena had predicted. The moment when Sienna needed something from me, when the carefully constructed facade had finally crumbled. And how I responded now would define our relationship forever. I thought about Margaret's voice on the phone. Give her space. Let her reach out if and when she's ready. Well, she was reaching out. The question was, what was I ready to give? I pressed the button. The gate opened with a mechanical hum, and I waited by my front door, my heart pounding, for my granddaughter to arrive and change everything. Through the glass panel beside my front door, I watched Sienna's car pull into the circular driveway. It was a Honda Civic, not the BMW she used to drive. That detail registered somewhere in the back of my mind as significant. The car stopped, but she didn't get out right away. I could see her silhouette in the driver's seat, head bowed, shoulders shaking. Finally, she opened the door and stepped out into the rain. She wasn't wearing a coat, just jeans and a thin sweater that was already soaked through. Her hair hung in wet strings around her face. She walked toward my door slowly, like someone approaching an executioner, and when she looked up at me through the glass, I barely recognized her. This wasn't the polished, put-together young woman who'd thrown food at my feet 3 weeks ago. This was someone who'd been stripped down to nothing, who'd hit bottom so hard that all the pretense had shattered. Her face was bare of makeup, her eyes swollen and red from crying, her whole body trembling from cold or fear or both. I opened the door before she could knock. Grandma. The word came out as a sob. I don't know where else to go. She stood there on my doorstep, drenched and shaking, and I had to make a choice. Let her in or close the door, show mercy or hold my boundary, be the grandmother I'd always been or become someone new, someone harder. I stepped aside. Come in. She stumbled through the doorway, and I closed it behind her, shutting out the cold November rain. We stood in my foyer, water dripping from her clothes onto my marble floor, and neither of us spoke for a long moment. I could smell the rain on her, mixed with something else, the sharp scent of fear, of desperation. I need to get you dry, I said finally, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. Wait here. I went upstairs and got towels, a thick robe, dry clothes from my closet that would be too big for her, but better than nothing. When I came back down, Sienna hadn't moved. She stood exactly where I'd left her, staring at the floor, tears still running down her face. Bathroom is there, I pointed. Go change. Get warm. She took the clothes from me without meeting my eyes and disappeared into the powder room. I went to the kitchen and made tea, my hands moving automatically through the familiar motions while my mind raced. What was I doing? Why had I let her in? After everything she'd done, everything she'd said, why was I still trying to take care of her? Because she's your granddaughter, a voice in my head whispered. Because this is what love looks like, even when it hurts. But another voice, Helena's voice, was louder. She needs to learn that actions have consequences. Sienna emerged from the bathroom wearing my robe, her wet clothes bundled in her arms. Her face was blotchy, her eyes haunted. She looked about 16 years old, small and lost in the oversized robe. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the kitchen table. Tea's almost ready. She sat, and I noticed her hands were shaking as she placed them flat on the table. I brought over 2 mugs of chamomile tea and sat across from her. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Sienna spoke, her voice hoarse. We were evicted today. They put our stuff on the curb, everything we owned, just sitting there in the rain while our neighbors watched. She wrapped her hands around the mug but didn't drink. Jared, he's been lying to me. About everything. He wasn't reduced to part-time. He was fired 2 months ago. And he's been pretending to go to work every day, leaving the apartment in the morning, coming back at night, telling me about his day. That never happened. I stayed quiet, letting her talk. The credit cards are all maxed out. We owe $47,000. Some of them are in my name, cards he opened without telling me. The landlord had started eviction proceedings 6 weeks ago, but Jared kept telling me he'd handled it, that we had an extension, that his next paycheck would cover it. She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. There was no next paycheck. There hasn't been a paycheck in 2 months. Where is Jared now? I asked. I don't know. When the sheriff came this afternoon, when I finally understood how bad everything was, I confronted him, and he just left. Got in his car and drove away. He's not answering his phone. He's just gone. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I called Mom. I thought she'd help. But she said, Sienna's voice broke. She said I made my bed when I chose Jared over common sense, and now I need to lie in it. She said she's not going to enable my poor choices. My heart clenched. I could hear Margaret's voice saying exactly those words, cold and unforgiving. I have $180 in my checking account, Sienna continued. Everything else is gone. The car isn't even mine anymore. It's a rental, the cheapest one I could get, and I don't know how I'm going to pay for it tomorrow. I've been sitting in that car for the past 4 hours, trying to figure out what to do, where to go. She finally looked up at me, her eyes desperate and pleading. I came here because you're the only person left, and I know I don't deserve your help. I know what I did, the things I said, the way I treated you. I replay it every single day, and I'm so ashamed I can barely breathe sometimes. She was crying harder now, words tumbling out between sobs. Those girls I brought with me that day, they're not even my friends. I barely knew them. I brought them because I wanted to look successful, wanted them to see that I had a rich grandmother and this perfect life. And when you mentioned money problems in front of them, I panicked. I couldn't let them see that I was struggling. So I lashed out at you instead. I destroyed the person who actually loved me to impress people who meant nothing. I sat there, watching my granddaughter fall apart in my kitchen, and I felt my heart breaking and hardening simultaneously. This was the moment. This was where I decided who I was going to be. I thought about that bowl shattering on my floor, the contempt in her voice, the way she'd called my love charity, the 3 weeks of silence, of pain, of questioning everything I'd ever done as a mother and grandmother, and I thought about the little girl who used to climb into my lap and fall asleep with her head on my shoulder. The teenager who'd once told me she wanted to be just like me when she grew up. The young woman sitting across from me now, stripped of all pretense, genuinely broken and asking for help. I took a sip of my tea and set the mug down carefully. When I spoke, my voice was calm, steady, without emotion. No. Sienna's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What? Not this time, I said quietly. Not like this. Grandma, please. I held up my hand, stopping her. I'm going to say 3 words to you, Sienna. 3 words you need to hear. 3 words that are going to change everything between us. She stared at me, frozen, waiting. Not this time. The words hung in the air between us, final and absolute. I watched understanding dawn in her eyes, watched her face crumble as she realized what I was saying. I'm not opening my wallet. I'm not fixing this for you. I'm not making it all go away so you can go back to your life and your Instagram feed and your carefully crafted illusion of success. My voice remained steady, though my heart was pounding. You need to learn something that no one has ever taught you. That actions have consequences. That respect isn't optional. That love isn't something you can spit on and then expect to be there when you need it. But I have nowhere to go, she whispered. That's not my problem, I said. And then, because I'm not cruel, because I'm still her grandmother. There's a women's shelter on Main Street. They'll take you in tonight. Tomorrow, you figure out your next step. You get a job, any job. You start dealing with your debt. You rebuild your life from the ground up, the way I did, the way millions of people do every single day. Sienna was crying so hard now, she could barely breathe. You're really going to let me sleep in a shelter? Your own granddaughter? I'm going to let you learn what it means to hit rock bottom, I said, because that's the only way you're going to understand the value of what you threw away. I stood up and walked to the front door. I opened it, letting in the cold November air and the sound of rain. Sienna sat at my kitchen table for another moment, as if she couldn't believe this was really happening. Then slowly, moving like someone in a dream, she stood up. She walked to the powder room, came out with her wet clothes, and walked past me without looking at me. At the threshold, she stopped. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything. I'm so sorry." "I know you are," I said. "But sorry isn't enough anymore." She walked out into the rain. I watched her get into that rental car, watched her sit there for a moment with her head on the steering wheel. Then she started the engine and drove away. I closed the door and locked it. And then, only then, did I let myself cry. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The look on Sienna's face when I said no. The sound of her car driving away. The cold finality of locking my door behind her. Around 3 a.m, I got up and went to my study. I sat at Richard's old desk and cried properly, the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that leave you exhausted and hollow. Part of me wanted to call Sienna, to tell her to come back, to take it all back, but I knew if I did that, nothing would change. She'd learned that her grandmother would always cave, always rescue her, always be there to clean up her messes, no matter how cruelly she'd been treated. Helena called at 7 the next morning. Did something happen? I woke up with the strongest feeling that you needed me. I told her everything. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Oh, Vivian," Helena finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "That must have been the hardest thing you've ever done." It was. My voice cracked. "Helena, what if I made a mistake? What if something happens to her? What if—" "Stop. You did the right thing, the brave thing, the loving thing, even though it doesn't feel like it right now. It feels like I just destroyed my relationship with my granddaughter forever." "No," Helena said firmly. "You just gave her the chance to become someone worth having a relationship with. There's a difference." I wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at me constantly. I checked my phone every few minutes, expecting a call from Margaret screaming at me, or from the police telling me something terrible had happened, or from Sienna begging one more time. But there was nothing. Just silence. 3 days passed. 3 days of not knowing where Sienna was, whether she was safe, whether she'd taken my advice about the shelter, or done something else entirely. I called the women's shelter anonymously, asking if they'd taken in anyone matching Sienna's description. They couldn't give me information due to privacy policies, which I understood but which drove me crazy with worry. On the 4th day, I got a call from an unknown number. My heart jumped into my throat as I answered. "Mrs. Clark?" A male voice, professional, businesslike. "Yes?" "This is David Richardson. I'm the manager at the Starbucks on Bedford Street in Stamford. I have an application here from a Sienna Ashford, and she listed you as a character reference. Do you have a few minutes to speak with me about her?" I sat down heavily on my couch. Yes, of course. Ms. Ashford applied for a barista position yesterday. She has very limited work experience in food service, but she was honest about that. She said she's going through a difficult time and needs steady work immediately. When I asked her about her character references, she got quite emotional and said you were her grandmother and that you'd been trying to teach her about honest work for years. My throat tightened. That's accurate. She seems genuinely eager to work, Mrs. Clark. But I have to be honest. I see a lot of people who think they want a job like this until they realize how hard it actually is. Long hours, minimum wage, difficult customers. Is your granddaughter the type who'll stick with it? Or will she quit after her first hard shift? I thought about the question carefully. The old Sienna would have quit, would have decided it was beneath her, that she deserved better. But the young woman who'd shown up at my door 3 nights ago, stripped of all pretense? I didn't know who she was yet. None of us did, including her. Mr. Richardson, I'm going to be completely honest with you. A month ago, I would have said no. Don't hire her. But something has changed recently. She's hit rock bottom and she's trying to climb back up. I think she'll surprise you. And if she doesn't, if she quits or doesn't show up, you call me and I'll come apologize to you in person. He laughed. Fair enough. I appreciate the honesty. I'll give her a shot. She starts tomorrow at 6 a.m. After he hung up, I sat there with my phone in my hand, feeling a strange mixture of pride and sadness. Sienna was working. She'd applied for a minimum wage job, something that would have been unthinkable to her a month ago. She was trying. I wanted to call her, to tell her I was proud of her, to say something encouraging. But I didn't. She needed to do this without me hovering, without my approval or validation. She needed to do it for herself. A week passed. Then 2. November turned bitter cold, and I found myself thinking about Sienna constantly. Where was she living? Was she warm? Was she eating properly? The not knowing was torture, but I held firm. I'd drawn my line. Now I had to live with it. Helena invited me to lunch at our usual place. I was picking at my salad, not really hungry, when she pulled out her phone. Okay, don't be mad, but I've been keeping tabs on Sienna's Instagram. Helena, just look. She turned the phone toward me. Sienna's feed had changed dramatically. All the carefully curated photos of fake luxury were gone. In their place was a single new post from 2 days ago. It was a photo of the Starbucks where she worked, taken from outside in the early morning darkness. The caption read, Day 12, 6 a.m. comes early when you're building a real life instead of a fake one. To everyone following me, I lied for years. The designer bags were rented, the restaurants were cheap places with good lighting. The success was an illusion. I was drowning in debt and pretending to swim. I lost everything, including my dignity and the people who actually loved me. This is me starting over. This is me being honest. If you can't handle that, unfollow now. The post had over 3,000 likes and hundreds of comments. I scrolled through them. Most were supportive, people sharing their own stories of starting over, of financial struggles, of learning hard lessons. A few were cruel, calling her a fraud, a liar, an attention seeker. Sienna had responded to several comments with grace and humility I'd never seen from her before. She's working, Helena said softly. Really working. I drove by there yesterday morning, saw her through the window in her green apron, making coffee, smiling at customers. She looked exhausted, but I don't know. Real. More real than I've ever seen her. I handed the phone back, unable to speak. Pride and sadness and hope were all tangled up inside me, fighting for dominance. There's something else, Helena said. Something you need to know, though I'm not sure you're going to like it. What? She's sleeping in her car, the rental she can't really afford. I saw her yesterday evening, parked behind the Starbucks. The back seat was full of clothes and blankets. She was sitting there eating something from a paper bag, probably day-old pastries from the store. The image hit me like a physical blow. My granddaughter, sleeping in a car, eating discarded food. Every instinct I had screamed at me to go to her, to bring her home, to fix this immediately. Don't, Helena said, reading my face. I know what you're thinking, but Vivian, she's learning. She posted yesterday about how many hours she has to work to pay off even a small portion of her debt. She's facing reality for the first time in her life. If you swoop in now, you undo all of that. She's sleeping in a car, Helena, in November. I know, and it's killing you. But she has options. She could call her mother. She could call Jared if she knew where he was. She could call any number of people. She's choosing to do this the hard way. That means something. I knew Helena was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your heart are two different things. That night, I lay awake, imagining Sienna curled up in the back seat of that rental car, cold and uncomfortable, probably crying. It took every ounce of willpower I had not to get in my car and go find her. On day 17, I was counting now, couldn't help it. I got a call from Margaret. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since that terrible conversation weeks ago, but something made me pick up. "I'm assuming you've heard," Margaret said without preamble. Her voice was tight, angry. "Heard what?" "About Sienna, about her little social media confession, about her working at Starbucks, about her living in her car." Each word was like an accusation. "Did you know about this?" "I knew she was working. I didn't know about the car." "This is your fault," Margaret said, her voice shaking. "You turned her away when she needed you most. You sent her to a shelter. What kind of grandmother does that?" The accusation hurt, but I'd been expecting it. The kind who loves her granddaughter enough to let her learn from her mistakes instead of enabling them. "Enabling?" Margaret's voice rose. "She's sleeping in a car, Mom. She's eating day-old food and working for minimum wage. This isn't teaching her a lesson. This is cruelty." "Then why don't you help her?" I asked quietly. "You're her mother. You have plenty of money. Why are you calling me instead of bringing your daughter home?" There was a long pause. When Margaret spoke again, her voice was different, defensive. "I told her she made her bed. I can't just back down from that now. She needs to understand that I'm serious about her taking responsibility. So you're doing exactly what I'm doing, but you're angry at me for it. That's different. I'm her mother. I'm supposed to be the disciplinarian. You're the grandmother. You're supposed to be the soft place to fall." "No," I said firmly. "I'm supposed to love her. And sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes love means letting people struggle so they can learn to stand on their own." "You sound like a self-help book." Margaret's voice dripped with contempt. "Meanwhile, my daughter is homeless." "She's not homeless. She's choosing a hard path over an easy one. There's a difference." Margaret made a disgusted sound. "I can't talk to you when you're like this, when you're so determined to be right that you can't see what you're doing to this family." She hung up. Again with the hanging up. I was starting to think it was a family trait. But her call had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Was I being cruel? Was this some twisted form of revenge for how Sienna had treated me? I examined my motives carefully, late into the night, trying to be honest with myself. No, this wasn't revenge. This was love. The hardest kind of love. The kind that stands back and lets someone fall because that's the only way they'll learn to get back up on their own. But God, it hurt. It hurt so much that sometimes I couldn't breathe. 3 weeks after I'd closed my door on Sienna, I decided to go see her. Not to talk to her, not to interfere, just to see with my own eyes that she was okay. I drove to the Starbucks at 5:30 in the morning and parked across the street where I could see the entrance. At 5:45, Sienna arrived. She pulled up in that rental car, parked, and sat there for a moment before getting out. She was wearing jeans and a simple jacket, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup that I could see, no designer anything. She looked tired, but she looked real. She got out of the car, locked it, and walked toward the Starbucks entrance. There was something different about her walk, about the way she carried herself. Less performative, more grounded. Like she'd shed a costume she'd been wearing for years and was finally moving through the world as herself. I watched her unlock the store and go inside. Through the window, I saw her turn on lights, start the coffee machines, begin her opening routine. She moved efficiently, like someone who'd done this enough times to have a system. There was a kind of dignity in her movements that I'd never seen before. I sat in my car watching her work as the sun started to rise. Other employees arrived. Customers started filtering in. Sienna took orders, made drinks, cleaned tables. She smiled at customers, laughed at something a coworker said. She looked exhausted, but she looked alive, present in a way she never had been when she was performing her Instagram life. After an hour, I drove away. I'd seen what I needed to see. She was surviving. More than surviving. She was doing the work, literally and figuratively. That afternoon, I got another call from David Richardson at Starbucks. "Mrs. Clark, I wanted to give you an update on your granddaughter." My heart jumped. "Is everything okay?" "More than okay. She's the best employee I've hired in years. She shows up 15 minutes early for every shift. She stays late when we're short-staffed. She never complains, never calls in sick, never shows attitude with difficult customers. Yesterday, she spent her entire break helping train a new employee when she could have been resting." I felt tears prick my eyes. That's wonderful to hear. "Mrs. Clark, I need to tell you something else. I noticed she's been sleeping in her car in our parking lot. I see her there when I leave at night, see her there when I arrive in the morning. I spoke to her about it today, told her that's not sustainable, especially with winter coming. She told me—" He paused. "She told me her grandmother is teaching her about earning her way back to dignity." Those were her exact words. I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. "I have a studio apartment above the store," David continued. "It's small, nothing fancy, but it's warm and it has a bathroom and a hot plate. I've been using it for storage. I told Sienna she could stay there in exchange for working some extra shifts. She cried, Mrs. Clark. She actually cried and asked me if I was sure, if she'd really earned it." "What did you tell her?" "I told her yes, that she'd earned it 3 times over. She moved in this afternoon. I wanted you to know. I don't know what happened between you two, but whatever you're doing, whatever lesson you're teaching her, it's working. She's becoming someone special." After he hung up, I sat in my study and cried. Relief, pride, grief, hope, all of it pouring out of me at once. Sienna had a place to sleep. She was working hard. She was learning. And she was doing it without me swooping in to fix everything. That night, I finally slept through the night for the first time in weeks. 6 months passed. 6 months of deliberate distance, of staying firm in my boundaries, of letting Sienna rebuild her life without my interference. It was the hardest 6 months of my life. Harder in some ways than losing Richard, because this was a choice I was making every single day. Helena kept me updated, casually mentioning things she'd seen or heard. Sienna had paid off $15,000 of her debt. She'd enrolled in evening accounting classes at the community college. She'd been promoted to shift supervisor at Starbucks. She'd cut all contact with Jared, who'd apparently resurfaced in Colorado with a new girlfriend and a new set of lies. Margaret and I didn't speak. The silence between us was its own kind of conversation. Years of unresolved pain and resentment solidified into something impenetrable. Sometimes I missed her. Sometimes I was angry at her. Most of the time, I just felt sad about the relationship we'd never quite managed to build. But I didn't reach out to Sienna, and she didn't reach out to me. We orbited each other at a careful distance, both of us waiting for something, though I wasn't entirely sure what. It was a Sunday in late April when everything changed. The same day of the week as that terrible afternoon 6 months ago, but the world felt entirely different now. Spring had arrived in Connecticut, turning everything green and alive. I was in my garden, planting the vegetables I grew every year, when my doorbell rang. I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, and walked around the side of the house to the front door. Through the glass panel, I saw Sienna standing there. My heart lurched. She looked different. Older somehow, though it had only been 6 months. She'd cut her hair shorter, a practical length that suited her. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, no designer labels, no performance. She was holding something, but I couldn't see what. I opened the door slowly. We stared at each other for a long moment, and I saw tears already forming in her eyes. "Hi, Grandma," she said quietly. "Sienna, I made something. For you. Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and she walked into the house where I'd closed the door on her 6 months ago. We went to the kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd thrown that bowl, and sat at the same table where I'd said those 3 words that changed everything. She placed what she'd been carrying on the table between us. It was a bowl. Not my Wedgwood china. That couldn't be replaced. This was different, handmade, ceramic, slightly imperfect, beautiful in its imperfection. "I've been taking a pottery class," Sienna said, her voice shaking. "At the community center. It's cheap, and I thought I needed to learn how to make something instead of just destroying things. I made this for you. It took me 17 tries to get one I thought was good enough." I reached out and touched the bowl gently. It was cream-colored with a delicate pattern etched around the rim. Simple, honest work. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "It's not as nice as the one I broke. Nothing ever will be. But I wanted you to have something I made with my own hands, something that represents—" She stopped, took a breath. "Something that represents who I'm trying to become." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Sienna started talking, and once she started, the words poured out. "I want to tell you what the last 6 months have been like, not because I want sympathy, but because I need you to know what you gave me when you said no." She wiped her eyes. "That first night, I went to the shelter like you said. It was terrifying. I'd never been anywhere like that, never been around people who had so little. But everyone was kind. They gave me a bed and a meal and told me about job resources." She twisted her hands together. "I got the job at Starbucks, and I worked harder than I've ever worked in my life. My feet hurt so badly those first weeks that I'd cry in the car afterward. My hands got burned from the steam wands. Customers yelled at me. I had to clean bathrooms and mop floors and do things I'd always thought were beneath me. And you know what I learned?" I shook my head, unable to speak. "Nothing is beneath me. Work is work. Honest work has dignity. The woman who cleans bathrooms has just as much value as the CEO. I'd never understood that before. I thought value came from status, from what you owned, from how things looked. But value comes from showing up, from doing what you said you'd do, from being someone people can count on." She pulled out her phone and showed me something. "I've been keeping track. Every dollar I earn, every debt payment I make, every hour I work. I've paid off $15,342. I have $31,658 to go. At my current rate, it'll take me 3 more years. 3 years of working multiple jobs, living in that tiny studio, eating cheap food, wearing thrift store clothes. Sienna, let me finish, please." She took a shaky breath. 3 years sounds like forever, but for the first time in my life, I'm proud of myself. Really proud. Not because of how things look or what I can post on Instagram, but because I'm doing something real. I'm facing what I did, I'm fixing what I broke, and I'm becoming someone I actually like. The tears were flowing freely down her face now. "I destroyed you that day. I took your love and your kindness, and I threw it in your face because I was so scared of looking weak in front of people who didn't even matter. I've thought about that moment every single day for 6 months. I've imagined 1,000 ways I could have handled it differently. And I've had to live with knowing that I'm capable of that kind of cruelty. Sienna. And when I came here that night, desperate and broken, you did the most loving thing anyone has ever done for me. You said no. You let me fall. You let me hit bottom and learn what it feels like to have nothing. Do you know what Mom said when I told her you turned me away?" I shook my head. "She said you were cruel, that you'd failed as a grandmother. But she was wrong, Grandma. You were brave. You loved me enough to let me suffer the consequences of my actions. You loved me enough to believe I could survive and learn and grow. And you were right. I did survive. I am learning. I am growing. She reached across the table and took my hands. I'm not here to ask you for anything. I'm not here to move back in or borrow money or get your help with my debt. I'm here to say thank you. Thank you for saying no. Thank you for teaching me what I should have learned years ago. Thank you for loving me enough to let me fall. I was crying now too, unable to hold it back anymore. I was so scared, I whispered. Every day I was terrified I'd made a mistake, that I'd pushed you away forever, that something terrible would happen to you. I was scared too, Sienna said. But being scared is okay. I needed to be scared. I needed to understand that actions have consequences, that life is hard, that nothing is promised to you just because you exist. We sat there holding hands across the table, both of us crying, and something that had been broken started to heal. Not completely. You can't erase 6 months or 6 years or 26 years in a single conversation. But it was a beginning. I met someone, Sienna said after a while, smiling through her tears. His name is Thomas. He's an engineer. He takes the same accounting class I do. He's kind and honest, and he lives within his means, and he thinks I'm amazing even though I'm in massive debt and work at Starbucks. We're taking things slow. Really slow. Because I'm not ready for fast anymore. Fast is how I ended up with Jared. Slow is how you build something real. I'd like to meet him, I said. When you're ready. I'd like that too. She squeezed my hands. And Grandma, I want to learn. About business, about investing, about everything you know. Not because I want money, but because I want to understand how you built what you built. I want to learn to be strong like you. My heart felt too full for my chest. I'd be honored to teach you. But I want to earn it. I want to keep working, keep paying off my debt, keep proving to myself that I can do hard things. And then, when I've got my feet under me, maybe I could work for you? At the boutiques? Start at the bottom? Learn the business properly? We'd pay you fairly, I said. No special treatment because you're my granddaughter. I wouldn't want special treatment, Sienna said firmly. I want to earn my place. That's the whole point. We talked for 2 more hours about her job, her classes, her plans for the future, about my business, my regrets about Margaret, my hopes for our relationship. It wasn't easy conversation. There were moments of pain, moments where we had to acknowledge hard truths. But it was honest, real, the kind of conversation I'd waited 26 years to have with her. When she finally left, she hugged me at the door. A real hug, long and tight and full of emotion. I love you, Grandma, she whispered. Thank you for loving me enough to let me go. I love you too, sweetheart. So much. I watched her drive away in that rental car she was still paying off, month by month. But she was driving toward something now, not away from it. That evening, I placed her handmade bowl in the center of my kitchen table. It wasn't Wedgwood, wasn't perfect, wasn't expensive, but it was more valuable than anything I owned because it represented transformation, redemption. The kind of love that survives being tested. Margaret still doesn't speak to me. Maybe she never will. That's her choice, and I've made peace with it. I can't control how she feels or what she does. I can only control myself, my choices, my boundaries. But Sienna comes to dinner every Sunday now. We cook together, using that bowl she made to serve salads and pasta and risotto. Sometimes Thomas comes with her, this quiet, kind man who looks at my granddaughter like she hung the moon. Sometimes it's just the 2 of us, grandmother and granddaughter, building something new from the pieces of what broke. She's still paying off her debt, still working at Starbucks while taking her classes, still living in that tiny studio above the store. And I've never been more proud of anyone in my entire life, because she's not doing it for me or for Margaret or for Instagram followers. She's doing it for herself. She's building a life based on truth instead of illusion, on work instead of shortcuts, on earned dignity instead of borrowed status. And someday, Years from now, when she's debt-free and successful in her own right, we'll look back at this time and understand that the day I said no was the day I gave her the greatest gift I could give. Not money, not rescue, but the chance to discover who she really was underneath all the performance and pretense. 3 words changed everything. Not this time. They were the hardest 3 words I'd ever spoken, and they saved us both.